Game Design Part 1, 8/27/2023 is currently 8/30/2023 with this document on the back burner. Introduction. In order to design games, it is important to note what avenue of game design you wish to pursue, as there are multiple paths that can be taken and are required to design a game. Some of those avenues are application development, computer science, mathematics, physics, assets, graphics, content, design philosophy, gameplay mechanics, publication, marketing, and distribution. In this particular study, we will be focusing on a study sample called Quake 3 Arena, which was developed by id Software and released in December 1999. The game had cutting and bleeding edge graphics that pushed the limits of what computer games could do. It required a special piece of PC hardware called a graphics card, which in 1999 would utilize either a PCI, peripheral component interconnect slot, or an AGP, accelerated graphics port slot. We won't be covering the history of id Software nor the number of games it has made that led to the creation of Quake 3 Arena. However, as stated, the game pushed the limits of what computer games could do in many various ways. It is worth mentioning that the game retains quite a lot of charm and character that has prevailed over the course of the last 24 years. Objective. The objective of this document is to cover the many things that go into creating a level for Quake 3 Arena, as well as the necessary tools and skills to build a level with replayability and competitiveness to it. First and foremost, I covered a lot of concepts related to Quake 3 Arena and GTK Radiant here. GTK Radiant is the level editor for Quake 3 Arena, though I will be covering additional level design concepts with an alternative that is based on GTK Radiant called NetRadiant. As for the link above, what I did not cover was how gameplay mechanics are the reason why the game has retained its charm and character over the course of the last 24 years or so. Unlike its predecessors Doom 1 and 2, Quake 1 and 2, the game can be configured to utilize custom resolutions and high graphics settings that allow it to run in HD without modifying the game or its content. While there have been many games released by id Software since 1999 that have better graphics, lighting, shading, animations, and etc., every single one of them is based on a very heavily modified version of the Quake 3 Arena engine, such as Wolfenstein, long list, Doom 3 and Resurrection of Evil, Rage and Rage 2, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, and Quake 4 and Quake Champions. Given its age, the game runs relatively well on older hardware and still retains quite a lot of chess-like characteristics. Its many modes of play range from free-for-all, deathmatch, tournament 1 vs 1, and capture the flag CTF. There is plenty of debate on which mode is the most popular, or the best, but make no mistake, its tournament 1 vs 1 cemented its position at a large number of yearly QuakeCon events, and is synonymous with Quake Live since it is the same exact game. It also resurfaced as a staple of Quake Champions with the advent of Overwatch, Fortnite, and PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds. To narrow the objective even further, we will be focusing on Tournament 1 vs 1 mode, as well as how to make a really cool and fun level for it that focuses on aspects of the mode and the game in order to produce something that is incredibly polished. In order to complete the objective, we should first analyze a number of tournament maps and describe them all in a way where their strengths and weaknesses can evoke a sense of common denominators that will be key in shaping, designing, and developing the level in the editor. Analysis. While the original Quake 3 Arena has a lot of tournament maps in it, Quake 3 Team Arena introduced a handful of maps that I think really illustrates what to do and what not to do in designing levels for the particular mode in question. Damn it. Oh, I might get it. I got it. Yes. I got it on video. Holy crap.
New high score.
119. All right. It's pretty good. Oh,
Let's fight. Let's fight. You have taken the lead. Impressive. Three frags left. Two frags left. Impressive. One frag left. You win.
Cool. I got that one tonight too.
New high score. Let's fight. Fight. You have taken the lead. Let's fight. Fight. You have taken the lead. Two hits. Impressive. Three frags left. Two frags left. One frag left.
Oh wow.
New high score.
Cool.
Let's fight. Let's fight. Let's fight. Let's fight. You have taken the lead.
Wow, you got that one same night. Cool.
New hot score.
So, allow me to explain each level's strengths and weaknesses, and at some point I will talk about each map in further detail by providing commentary in a video that focuses on the layout and item placement. House Decay MP31. This map is without a doubt extremely well made. It is small enough to have a strong focus on 3 different weapons, and it provides a really strong emphasis on aesthetics and geometry to allow the gameplay to swing in either direction. The map was remade for Quake Live and has other items added to it which take away from the charm of the original. It probably goes without saying, but this is one of my favorite maps above all of the original Pro Q3 DM tourney maps. Death Factory MP32. It reminds me of Base Siege MP Team 1, and it feels like a recycled version of that map. While that's not exactly a bad thing, as it is common for a game developer to recycle assets and attempt to reuse those assets with a slightly different twist, in this instance there are a lot of shortcomings to this map that I don't particularly care for, given that it is a tournament map. It is too big to be a tournament map. It has too many spawn points and is better suited for free-for-all and deathmatch. If it were an FFA map, this map would get about a 7 to 8 out of 10. As it stands, the middle tier is disconnected from the top tier. This forces the players to have to use jump pads to traverse from tier to tier, which exposes a player to be quite vulnerable when they use them, which can be seen in the video link above. The jump pads is a serious sticking point here because the map would actually score a lot higher as a tournament map if there were stairs on both sides that connect the middle tier to the top tier, because at that point the multi-tiered combat would be far more cohesive and a lot less predictable. This point alone, though incredibly small, can be the difference between whether it makes or breaks a level. Simply put, the map is not badly made at all, but considering that it is named MP32, it does not feel like a great 1 vs 1 map. I have to tank its score a lot because it would have made more sense to add some stairs to connect the middle and top tier, or instead use another map in the rotation. Temple of Pain MP33. I have mixed feelings about this map because it has areas that feel very claustrophobic, and it has a rather simple item placement which does not promote a healthy multi-tiered experience. However, the map looks really awesome. The problem is looks aren't everything, because there's just some things about this map that don't make much practical sense in a tournament map. The rocket launcher, nail gun, and shotgun are all very close to each other, and the railgun is the only weapon on that side of the map. This would have been a much better map if it made better use of the courtyard area by adding some stairs and ledges to a bridge where the armor is, in addition to providing other ways to get to either side of the map from that higher tier, as this would have made the map given the map a lot more depth. Eliminating the hallway to the nailgun ammunition, or providing an alternate way to access or traverse from the railgun tower to that hallway would have made perfect sense. Evil Playground, MP34. This map is without a doubt extremely well made. It isn't as small as House of Decay, but it has a really well thought out approach to multi-tiered combat, which is a signature of extremely well made maps. The only thing that I do not like about this map is the fact that it has death pits, and they're pretty annoying. However, that's just a pet peeve at this point because I'm not going to tank its score based on that. The combat is extremely fun, challenging, and the pendulum of fairness can swing in either direction, which is an indication of an extremely well-made tournament map. Common denominators. So, what are the common denominators in the levels I discussed? Multi-tiered combat, effective use of geometry, effective use of texturing, effective use of space, effective use of lighting, effective item placement. What I will do is talk about these concepts in greater detail before coming up with a design philosophy to create a map, and then to texture, shape, sculpt, modify, populate, light, and compile, render the map. If any of these things aren't up to snuff or are out of place, it will adversely affect its performance. The mapping process takes a while to complete, and typically speaking, without a lot of experience, you won't be able to create a really good map in a single day. Even the map that I made in a single day in this particular video isn't finished.
You have taken the lead. You are tied for the lead. You have lost the lead.
So being constantly in view of rock is not conducive to being one level, so there's definitely a limitation. And my mouse is kind of acting up.
Impressive. Taken the lead. Frags left. Tied for the lead. You've lost the lead. One frag left. You are tied for the lead. You have taken the lead.
Barely won it. Ever since I created that level, I've thought about changing things in it to make it more fun to play. As it stands, it has some issues that stem from being incomplete. I wouldn't expect it to get a 10 out of 10 like MP31 or MP34. However, there is an issue about that map that leads me to believe that no amount of changes will be able to make it a viable competitive level, though I could be incorrect about that. And the issue that leads me to believe as such stems from the structure of the map. A man by the name of Carl Sagan, a famed science communicator that won a Pulitzer Prize for his books The Dragons of Eden and for Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, once raised an analogy called Flatland. And in this Flatland analogy from his show, Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, the man talks about how inhabitants of Flatland are about as flat as can be. They go about their flat business, they go in and out of their flat houses, driving around in their flat cars. They take part in flat parties, they eat flat food, they breathe flat air. All their friends are flat too. Everything they do is about as flat could possibly even be. Sounds pretty flat, doesn't it? Yeah, well, John Carmack and John Romero probably grew up playing Atari for years, watching Carl Sagan in the show Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, until they eventually said to each other, two Johns, "Hey John, what's up John? You know, I was thinking a lot about making a game." "Oh yeah?" "Yeah. Buddy, there's a lot of games out there." "Oh, I know, John. But they all have one thing in common." "Oh yeah?" "Yeah. Well, John, do tell. What do they all have in common?" "They're all pretty flat." "I was thinking the same thing, dude. And I want to make a game that's not flat." "Really?" "Yeah. Nobody has ever done that before." "I know. What if we made the first game in existence that wasn't flat?" "Dude, I could totally do it, bro. Nobody's ever done it before, though." "Oh, I know, John. I know. But I believe in myself, John." "Well, buddy, I believe in you too, but..." It'll change the entire way games are played, John. Yeah, but you would need to be a genius to pull that off. You saying I'm not a genius or something? Nah, I never said that. Just saying you have your work cut out for you, John. I was thinking Wolfenstein 3D. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, escaping from the clutches of the Nazis. B.J. Blazkowicz. That sounds intense. Count me in. And from that day forward, two Johns took an oath to embark on a journey to make a game that had depth, as they went about changing the entire way the games were played by people all around the world. It's worth noting that there were also two Carmacks. They actually did this with the games Hover Tank 3D and Catacombs 3D, but that wasn't enough. They did this again with Wolfenstein 3D, but that wasn't enough either. Then they did it again with Doom. Doom raised the bar to such an immensely high level that the game actually had horizontal and vertical depth. But in 1996, with the release of a cool game called Quake, they permanently impacted the world by making the first FPS that was truly 3D and wasn't flat. Though Descent from 1995 officially holds that title, Descent's gameplay was quite disorienting, and it wasn't quite like Doom. Because in it, there were rooms above and below other rooms, which Doom was unable to do. In Doom and Doom clones like Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, Dark Forces, and etc., there had been a limitation to where the Z-buffer could not allow multiple rooms to be stacked above or below one another without some sort of hacky view portal magic. With Quake, hacky view portal magic became a thing of the past. Comparing to Flatland. In reference to Flatland, the same sort of thing happened. One day, a three-dimensional creature represented by a sphere decided to pass through Flatland, not unlike the idea that John Carmack had to create the first three-dimensional game. And that's when the two-dimensional Flatlanders saw slices of the three-dimensional sphere, not unlike when id Software made multiple games that capitalize on more aspects of depth. Now remember, Flatlanders can't actually see the full third dimension of depth, not unless they remember each prior layer of the sphere, because what they see are individual layers of that sphere, not unlike when people saw each individual game that id Software made. At first, the circle appeared as a little dot, but after a while, the circle got bigger and bigger, not unlike how games id Software kept making got bigger and bigger. A sphere appears out of thin, flat air as a circle and grows to a pretty large size, not unlike how id Software grew to an industry giant. At which point, the Flatlanders who saw the sphere pass through their dimension, they began to question their flat sanity, asking each other, just what the flat is going on around here? The answer is that nobody in Flatland really knew what the hell was going on, because they didn't understand depth. But in Quake 3 Arena, that's what the game was designed to take advantage of. Mechanics. In order to understand how to make the best use of space in a particular map, well, a lot of trial and error is in order before anyone has a great idea of how to do that, as well as how to arrange the items in that map. For instance, in House of Decay MP31, there's a lot of areas and choke points that allow each weapon to be better suited for the situation. You wouldn't want to use the rocket launcher if you're in the hallway unless you're aiming at the rockets a fair distance away. You wouldn't want to use the plasma gun from a fair distance away unless you know the opponent is running in a predictable manner. You wouldn't want to use the lightning gun from a fair distance away unless you can close in on that particular distance. There are strengths and weaknesses to each particular gun that aren't readily apparent, so let's talk about the weapon mechanics. In Quake 3 Arena, there are a number of weapons. The gauntlet, machine gun, shotgun, grenade launcher, rocket launcher, lightning gun, plasma gun, BFG-10K, the nail gun, proximity mine launcher, and chain gun, though the last three are only in Team 3 Arena. Here's a guide about the weapon mechanics, as well as below. The gauntlet has an unlimited amount of ammo. It is only useful if you're in close proximity to the opponent, otherwise it isn't. While you do not need any ammunition for this gun, since it isn't a gun, it does not do any damage at all unless you're literally touching an opponent with it. It's good for close-up fights, it does 50 damage, and it has unlimited uses, but you can only use it in close proximity. Machine gun and the bullets. This is extremely useful in basically any scenario, but it does not do a lot of damage unless you are accurate and consistently hitting the target. It's good for general purpose, does 7 damage, spawn with 100 rounds each time, and it's not great against more powerful weapons. The shotgun and shells. This is moderately useful in scenarios from low to mid range. It shoots 10 pellets per shell, which each do 10 damage. It's great for low range, and you start with 10 rounds on pickup and 50 for shell pickups. It's less great for mid-range, and it's poor for long range. The grenade launcher and grenades. This is not very useful for most situations, but it is extremely useful in close proximity. The grenades bounce and linger until they explode, or they explode if they land on an enemy. They do splash damage to enemies, or they will do 100 damage upon impact. It's pretty useful if you have nothing better. It can be used for a grenade jump. It's not exactly easy. It's great for close quarters, but they do splash damage, which can hurt you. You start with 10 grenades and 10 grenades per grenade pickup. Rocket launcher, rockets. This is basically the main weapon in the game, and it is a staple of the Quake series. This shoots a rocket which does either splash damage or 100 direct damage if they hit an enemy. This can be used mid to long range, but short range is risky. It's the mainstay of the game, the staple of the series. It's great for mid to long range. It can be used to rocket jump, but it does splash damage, which can hurt you. And you start with 10 rockets, and you get 5 per rocket pickup. Lightning gun and light. This gun does a lot of damage in short to mid range, but it is completely useless long range. It does not do any splash damage, nor can it provide any movement advantage. It is extremely useful in tight situations. It does a lot of damage fast. It uses a lot of ammo fast. And you start with 100 lightning, and you get 60 lightning per pickup, though I think that ranges depending on the game. Plasma gun and plasma. This gun is really useful for mid-range, though it can also be used effectively in short or long range, depending on whether the user can sufficiently track the movement of a target. It does a lot of damage pretty fast. It's really useful in all scenarios, but requires practice. You start with 50 plasma and 30 per plasma pickup, though that also varies. It does splash damage, which can hurt you, and it can be used to scale walls through a process called plasma climbing. BFG 10K and BFG ammo. This gun is basically a rapid-fire version of the rocket launcher. It carries many of the same characteristics, but its rounds move faster than rockets. Typically, this would not be a good choice to include in a tournament level, as it makes the game quite unfair. It does an extreme amount of damage. It does splash damage, which can hurt you. It can be used to do the same thing as rocket jumping. You start with 10 BFG ammo, and you get 15 BFG per BFG ammo pickup. Nails and the nail gun. Nail gun and nails. The nail gun is only available in Quake 3 Team Arena, but it is pretty useful. Its only application at any tournament level that I am aware of is Temple of Pain. It does an extreme amount of damage if all nails hit the target. It's best for close range, but not so much for long range, mid to long range. Though it is pretty decent at mid range if you can manage to hit the opponent. Start with 10 nails, and you get 15 nails per pickup. The proximity mine launcher and the proximity mines. The proximity mine launcher is only available in Quake 3 Team Arena and not applicable to a tournament level, so I won't talk about it in this document. Chain gun and rounds. The chain gun is only available in Quake 3 Team Arena and not exactly applicable to a tournament level. However, with custom maps, this could be pretty useful in tournament mode. Still, since that would drastically change the dynamics of 1 versus 1, I won't cover that in this document. Item mechanics. In Quake 3 Team Arena, there are a number of items. Note, less than or equal to means less than or equal to. Health. Small health adds 5 up to 200. Medium health adds 25 health up to 100. Large health adds 50 up to 100 health. Mega health adds 100 up to 200 health. Armor. Armor shard adds 5 up to 200. Yellow armor adds 50 up to 200. And red armor adds 100 up to 200. Usable items. Teleporter, activate to transport to a random spawn point. Medkit raises health to 125. Invulnerability, activate to freeze position and deflect all attacks for 10 seconds. I believe it's 10 seconds. Kamikaze, can be detonated or self-detonates if killed but not gibbed. Power-ups. Battlesuit, reduces direct damage, deflects splash damage. Flight, ignore gravity. Haste, move and shoot a lot faster. Invisibility, become harder to see. Quad damage, increases all outgoing damage by 3 times by default, not 4x. Regeneration, adds a health for every second, 25 up to 100, and then 5 up to 200. Runes. Scout, Similar to haste, cannot pick up armor. Doubler increases all outgoing damage by 2 times. Guard sets health and armor to 200, regenerates health to 200 if damaged. Ammo regen regenerates ammunition and increases fire rate. Also with the guard, if you pick up health and your health isn't 200, it will add that health up to 200. Strategies. There are a number of strategies that can be used in Quake 3 Quake 3 Arena and Team Arena that aren't readily apparent, and I will not go into great depth about them because the geometry of the maps actually changes the strategies that can be used in a variety of ways. Choke points are pretty good to use. Bunny hopping and strafe jumping are also good to use. Rocket jumps can be useful. Plasma wall boosting can also be useful, but there are a lot of other strategies which just won't be visually apparent unless the shape of the map has a distinct scenario. Now I'm going to cover some of the strategies that I used in the videos I already listed. Evil Playground. One of the strategies that I used is mimicking the enemy's movements to pelt James with a barrage of machine gun bullets in the beginning of the match. This is a general strategy. Another strategy that I used was switching weapons to get combination hits, which is another general strategy. Another strategy that I used was positioning myself in certain locations of the map so that I could hear where James was spawning, which is another general strategy. Another strategy that I used was using the railgun and then shooting predictive rockets at an item I knew James was running to, a general strategy. These strategies wouldn't necessarily work against a human opponent, but they'll work for a bot because they typically run the same patterns. House of Decay. Using the combination weapon strategy is harder to pull off because the rocket launcher is sort of slow and the lightning and plasma gun do somewhat equivalent rate of damage. Using the spawn location positioning strategy is harder to pull off because in certain positions it is impossible to hear where Fritzkrieg is spawning. Generally speaking, there is a formula to it, but it is still rather random and depends on where the player is on the map when they kill the bot, as well as where the bot is when they die. And I think it randomly selects that location depending on where the player is at the time of respawn. However, using choking strategies is far more effective in this map because of the tight hallways. This is able to be seen quite a lot in that video. Death Factory. Pi's movement is incredibly predictable, but her spawning location is completely random, and there are a lot more spawn points in these two maps, in MP32 and MP33, than the two I just covered. First off, it is true that Death Factory has a lot of spawn points, and the best thing to do is to guard items. In all 4 of these levels, there is a consistent amount of effort going into picking up health and armor. That is a general strategy, and it is a core central focus to this game, just like collecting minerals and Vespene gas in StarCraft. Health and armor are basically resources in this game. What is not readily apparent is that time is also a resource in this game. With that said, having a collection route is pretty important. You want to be able to guarantee that you control the items and that the enemy does not. If you are able to do this, then you will always have an advantage over the opponent because they will have to struggle to keep up. But if they are just a lot more accurate and deadly than you, then even item control may not necessarily guarantee a win. In Death Factory, Pi is constantly going up the jump pads and sort of lingers around the same areas. Using that as a known fact, that allows me to collect the necessary weapons and to guard certain areas, particularly the rocket launcher area. Going for the railgun in this level is a bit of a chore. So is going for the shotgun and even the grenade launcher, if I'll be perfectly honest. However, all it takes to collect the 2 yellow armors and the rocket launcher in order to be at a serious advantage. All it takes is to collect the 2 yellow armors and rocket launcher in order to be at a serious advantage. Then, depending on the approach, collect the railgun, shotgun, and grenade launcher in a syncopated rhythm. That way Pi will constantly be on the back foot. The back foot, or backpedaling, is a term for having to run away from a confrontation rather than to engage in one. This can actually be a very effective strategy for psychological manipulation of an opponent that has item control, though a bot will not know how to do this to attain an advantage. Only a human will. Despite all of this, even though Death Factory is not a favorite level of mine, I still know how to navigate the map in order to have some knowledge of where Pi will go or won't go, or what situations I'll be at a disadvantage to put myself in. One such disadvantage is allowing Pi to collect the railgun because all bots on Nightmare have an incredibly deadly level of accuracy with the railgun. Short of that, collecting items and then posting up in certain locations is an incredibly useful strategy. Temple of Pain. So in Temple of Pain, Janet is pretty predictable. However, the item placement is really crowded on one side of the map and pretty sparse on the other. With Death Factory, a couple of stairwells from the middle tier to the top tier would have made all the difference in the world to make it a far more competitive tournament level. In Temple of Pain, a lot more geometry should have been used to make the level feel more vertical. Multi-tiered levels are a lot more enjoyable because it gives the players more real estate to cover in order to retain item control. In this particular map, item control is pretty easy to do. What is not so easy is avoiding railgun shots from Janet, because she will occasionally spawn next to the railgun, and there's only a yellow armor and some armor shards in the level that give any player a way to protect themselves from up to 2 shots. In this level, it is extremely difficult to avoid being railed twice in a row by a bot on Nightmare if they happen to have the railgun. So what that means is that the entire focus of the level is to prevent Janet from getting it. Or if she does get it, then use the geometry of the level that is essentially only 1.5 tiers tall. I would not call this a multi-tier level at all, even though there are clearly 2 tiers. The reason I would prefer not to call it a 2-tier level is because the first tier of the level is really short. Whereas in House of Decay, there are definitely 3 tiers. Though in the bottom tier is limited to a pool of water, and that's where the armor is. Nobody will want to go in there if the yellow armor isn't there, because of how vulnerable they will be in that position. However, in Temple of Pain, the only real vertical gameplay you get is if you're using the jump pads. And on one side of the map, the vertical gameplay is limited to the room with the nail gun. Vertical gameplay. I may have mentioned numerous times that multi-tiered levels are pretty clutch and essential to having a map having replayability factor to it. When taking a closer look at the tournament levels from Quake 3 Arena, Power Station 0218, the Proving Grounds, the Camping Grounds, Hell's Gate, Vertical Vengeance, Lost World, Fatal Instinct, the very end of view, Power Station 0218, Q321. This map has no vertical gameplay, and it would really benefit from having some. Might even be pretty easy to implement a way for that to be a thing. Otherwise, the level looks really nice, which goes a long way in receiving a mediocre score. But the general flow of the map feels very, very flat, and that's because the gameplay certainly is. Sarge is not a tough opponent even on Nightmare difficulty. The Proving Grounds, Q322. This map has vertical gameplay, especially in the rocket launcher area, but also the stairwells. This map was part of Q3 tests and left a pretty deep impression on me long before the full game was released. This map looks great, plays great, and is pretty tough against Hunter. There's really not a whole lot more to ask for from a competitive level. The Camping Grounds, Pro Q3DM6 and Pro Q3DM6. The default Q3DM6 isn't even a tournament level, but it definitely plays like one. The item placement is different in Pro Q3DM6, which is a tournament map. It has a lot of vertical gameplay, and I would encourage people to take inspiration from this map, how it's made, how it flows, how it plays, if you want to build a really great level. Hell's Gate, Q323. While Q323 does have a couple of tiers, it feels a lot like Temple of Pain. It has Death Pitch, which I don't particularly care for, and it isn't very competitive tournament level. With some changes, it probably could be made to be more enjoyable, but I doubt anyone's going to give it a touch-up after 24 years. Vertical Vengeance. This map has vertical in the name of the map. Both versions are geared for tournament play, and they differ to a great degree with the addition of the teleporter in the Pro version, as well as items being placed in different locations. This is by far one of my favorite levels, tournament levels, but the texturing in this level hasn't exactly aged well. Lost World. This map is really, really good. It has a lot of vertical gameplay to it. It also boasts a slew of alcoves, hallways, and ways to navigate from one end to the other without feeling like you have to go a specific route to get from point A to B. This was played a lot in Quake Live, and it's a staple to the game. Fatal Instinct, Q325. This level does have multiple tiers, but it feels a lot like Dead Simple from Doom. This level design philosophy, with the fog preventing someone from being able to see an opponent that's too far away, does give the map some charming dynamics that are rather unique. However, it's a bit of a gimmick, and it takes away from the enjoyment of the map as far as professional tournament play is concerned. Also, quad damage should not be used in tournament levels, though that's my opinion. The very end of view, Q326. This level is also rather gimmicky and has a BFG in it, and it's pretty easy to fall off into the void. I would never think to play this server against a human player in tournament mode, but it does look pretty cool, and it is pretty cool as a final boss level. While it does have some vertical gameplay, it doesn't have the type of vertical gameplay that other 4 space maps have. The bouncy map, the longest yard, space chamber, and apocalypse void. I'm not going to discuss these levels at great length, but they all have plenty of vertical gameplay. Multi-tiered combat isn't everything, however. Item placement is pretty important, but also so is the bot behavior or just general all-around mechanics going on in the map. Bouncy map is fun, but the lighting is pretty flat. The longest yard is fun, but the bots are pretty tough when they have the railgun. Space chamber is fun, but it is wicked annoying because of how many ways you can fall into the void. And apocalypse void feels pretty gimmicky, really gimmicky, and the platforms aren't much different than jump pads. While I really like the longest yard, it is not a very competitive tournament level at all. None of them really are. However, Space Station 1138, which is a map that I once made, is a pretty competitive space-based tournament level with vertical gameplay, though I don't think it ever received a title or designation to where people would play it on a server professionally. Typically speaking, most community maps that are made for the game don't get a lot of credit or acclaim, and that's just how it's always been in the Quake community. Even really well-made levels that got high ratings on LVL World, they don't have a place where people flock to it and play it in a standard rotation. And that's mainly because in order to play custom levels, you have to fulfill a lot of instructions. All things considered, I made that level when I was 15 years old, Space Station 1138, for a mapping competition, and the limitations were about 100 brushes, I believe. Whereas the tournament levels in Quake 3 Arena and Quake 3 Team Arena, those were part of an official game released by id Software, so they're not going to pull any punches in publishing them. Now, in order to build any level that would be a total success, it relies on the initial shape of the map, which requires some graph paper and drawing it out. Shape. The shaping process can actually take days, but the end result will be something highly polished, and this can be seen in a number of levels that were made for Quake Live, like Heavy Rain. Heavy Rain is one of the coolest maps I've ever played. It has a general shape. There's also Airwalk, though I believe that is a take on a Quake World level, and has shape too. And then there's also Blood Run, which is the most official tournament level I can think of that was never a part of the game itself. That too has a shape. But even if we take a look at Quake 2 and even Quake 1, there are plenty of examples of great maps there too. The Edge, Tokay's Towers, the Frag Pipe, the Sewers, and the Warehouse. There are even more from Quake 1 that I cannot remember for the life of me, but Tim Willis really knew what the hell he was doing because I think he was responsible for many of these maps, especially Q3DM1. People still play Q2DM1. People still play Q2DM1 competitively, as it's a great example of a map that works for tournament and free-for-all, but every adaptation to Quake 3 Arena has been less than exhilarating than the original. I think it's because of the scaling difference between the two games. It has a lot of vertical gameplay to it, multiple tiers, a pretty balanced layout, and it has a really unique shape to it that I've never seen be reproduced in a manner to where I was impressed or blown away. Q2DM1 is by far one of the best maps I've ever seen, and even the rest of the maps I just listed, they're really good. Even the Pits Q2DM5 is good. It's just that some of these maps really delve into being a bit of a breathing entity itself with an environment. But now the question is, how does one go about creating the shape for these maps? Well, imagine if you would, that you would have a conversation with Carl Sagan himself and ask him how to build a 4-dimensional tesseract, and then build a level off of that. That's sort of the process involved in making a really good level like the ones I just described. There are a lot of others that I haven't mentioned, but I can't remember all of the really well-made levels I've played. The bottom line is that a good map has to have a general flow to it where players can traverse the map in multiple ways, and further to that point, it has to be really polished and have a good amount of flow to it, have the items placed in ways where it makes perfect sense and is advantageous to the players, and then you have to top it all off with well-executed aesthetics, geometry, and lighting. All of these things are reasons why I really like House of Decay and Evil Playground, because they tick every single box repeatedly. The fact of the matter is this process is different in its chronological execution as the map is being built. There's really no one-size-fits-all approach, as every approach is rather unique and changes from one idea to the next. Graph paper is a pretty great way to start out, because then you can layer the graph paper with additional shapes and such, and overlay them in order to get a feel for how the map is going to flow. Tokay's Tower is a great example of a level that has vertical gameplay down pat, and to this day, I sometimes think about how to go from one end of the map to the other, top to bottom, etc. The only thing I never liked about it is swimming through the water. Swimming through water is not a good design philosophy in any tournament level. Using jump pads is not a good design philosophy at all the time, but it does allow the level creator to make better use of space. Using little alcoves from one end of the map to another to tuck away ammo boxes doesn't make a lot of sense in many cases unless those boxes of ammo just so happen to be conveniently placed along a path between armor, health, and specific weapons. Lastly, before I talk about applying all of these things in conjunction, I can't stress this enough. But even if a map is shaped perfectly and is textured great, the aesthetics are awesome, the lighting is superb, and the item placement seems to be well executed, a map can still suffer from not being all that fun to play. If people feel like the map is a chore to play, then all of that hard work will have been for nothing. As a general rule of thumb for shaping the level, I think of really basic shapes like squares, rectangles, bevel surfaces, and curves, and incorporate them into the bottom line structure of the map before adding things like trim, edges, light, fixtures, models, and things of that nature. Because a really rough draft of a level doesn't even need to be textured or lit all that well for a map to have some really promising gameplay to it. The point being, creating the structure of the map around the item placement and item control is a really good idea. Conclusion. To be continued. If you liked what you saw, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. I will be adding another part to this at some point, and thanks for watching.